So, I am Lisithayazhini, Assistant Professor, Department of Neuroscience Technology, School of Allied Health Science from Yenepoya. So, today we are going to discuss on topic on brain lobes and its function. So, specific learning objectives. At the end of the session, students must able to know about describe brain and its layer, classification of brain lobes, explain the structure and function of brain lobes, and discuss the impact of brain's lobe damages. So, we move on into the introduction part. Brain is one of the largest organ in the body and it coordinates most body activities. Each part of the brain is responsible for controlling the different body functions. We all know that the brain contained in skull and its weight is about 1300 to 1400 grams. So, and we move on into the brain and its covering images. So, it is called as an meninges. So, there may be three types. One is an outer layer, middle layer and the inner layer. So, the outer layer is called as an dura mater and the middle layer is called as an arachnoid mater and the inner part is known as an pia mater. So, we move on into the topic lobes of the brain. There may be different types of lobes. So, one is an frontal, temporal, parietal and occipital, and final one is an insula. So, we move on into the frontal lobe. So, frontal lobe is nothing but stand one of the most important for higher cognitive functions. So, if we discuss about one lobes, so its frontal lobe, its front part in the brain, it's directly behind the forehead. You can visualize this image. So, the frontal lobe is just placed direct behind the forehead. So, we move on into the structure of the frontal lobe. So, the frontal lobe occupies the largest part of the brain comparing to the other lobes. The most notable area includes primary motor cortex, prefrontal cortex and the Broca's area. So, the primary motor cortex, where it was located, you can visualize in this image, it just situated back of the frontal lobe and it's mostly responsible for voluntary movements. So, voluntary movement in the sense automatically the things which has been optimizing in our body. For an example, heart rates and the function of the lungs, everything is considered around the voluntary movements. So, next is an prefrontal cortex. So, prefrontal cortex is located at very in front of the lobe, which includes in decision making, planning and controlling the behavior. So, decision making in the sense the thing which has to be done per day, planning in the sense throughout a day how I can do all these activities in a particular timing, everything is controlled by the prefrontal cortex. And we move on into the Broca's area. So, Broca's area is one of the most important area comes under in the frontal lobe. So, it just located most commonly in the left side of the hemisphere in presence of frontal lobe and is essential for speech production and language processing. So, we comes into the functions of frontal lobe. There are so many types of and functions in the frontal lobe. We will discuss one by one. The first and foremost is movement control. So, one of the primary function of frontal lobe is regulation of voluntary movement as we discussed early in the slides. So, the primary motor cortex controls fine motor skills such as writing, typing, playing a musical instrument, how it was happening, sending a signals via to the specific muscle groups present all over in a body. So, in case of any damages over in this area, frontal lobe, it may result in less moment of motor coordination will be affected with the specific person. Then we move on into the another function, it's an executive function. It will included in the wide range of mental abilities such as planning, decision, problem solving and reasoning as we discussed earlier. These skills in a particular human to engage with complex thinking and goal-directed behavioral activities among us. So, next is an prefrontal cortex. It's responsible for regulating the thoughts, action to align with long-term goals and it enables people to weigh the consequence of their decision. If in case of any damages in the prefrontal cortex, it may result in poor emotional activities, actions, judgment and inappropriate emotional responses. So the emotional responses comes under crying, being sad, sensitivity, emotional and excitement, everything. And emotional regulation. It helps the individual to regulate the emotions like managing the stress, engage in appropriate social behavioral activities. And next is in personality and behavior. It plays a vital role in personality and social interaction and self-awareness being among in the society. And speech and language. As we said earlier, Broca's area plays a major role in frontal lobe. So it's located in the left frontal lobe. It's crucial for speech production. And individual with damage in the Broca's area, this condition is called as an aphasia, that is Broca's aphasia. The person may struggle to form a sentence. For an example, I have given a picture here. The person wants an apple. He couldn't able to complete the sentence. I want, and there will be some lag in the sentence. So the patient affected with an Broca's area, it's considered as an Broca's aphasia. They may struggle to form a sentences. And the impact of frontal lobe damage. So what are the impact of frontal lobe damages or injuries that may affect with the cognitive and emotional capabilities? And most commonest damages how a frontal lobe can be comes under means TBI, that means traumatic brain injuries. Sometimes it may lead to stroke, tumors and neurodegenerative disorders like Alzheimer's. And we move on into the second lobe. It's known as a temporal lobe. As like a frontal lobe, temporal lobe also plays a major role in the day-to-day activities. So we'll discuss on it. So temporal lobe is located on both the sides of the brain near the temples, play a crucial role in various essential cognitive processes. As a pair of a brain region responsible for the functions like hearing, language comprehension, memory and recognition of objects and faces. So the structure of temporal lobe. So as we discussed, seen in the last slide, the temporal lobe are situated in the lower region of the cerebral cortex just above the ears. You can visualize in this picture. So as two primary areas within the temporal lobes includes, one is a primary auditory cortex which is responsible for processing of sounds, and second is a medial temporal lobe which plays a key role in memory. So the left temporal lobe typically houses with the vernix area, a region vital for language comprehension. As like we discussed in frontal lobe, how the Broca's area plays a major role, as like that in temporal lobe, vernix area plays a very major role in language comprehension in temporal lobe. In contrast, the right temporal lobe is more involved in non-verbal auditory information and recognizing the faces, that is known as in facial recognition. Non-verbal in the sense the which via we can hear through auditory canal. So the functions of temporal lobes, the first and foremost is an auditory process. That means the perception and interpretation of these sounds can be done via with the temporal lobe. And next is an primary auditory cortex, the process of auditory information from the ear. This allows the human to detect difference between the various sounds such as the speech, music and environmental noise. So next is in language comprehension. Already we discussed vernix area is prohibited. It's only for language comprehension. So it's just located in the left temporal lobe mostly. This region is essential for understanding the spoken and written languages. In case of any damages over in the vernix area, it can be result in the condition called vernix aphasia. That means in which the individual may produce a fluently but non-sensational speech and they struggle to comprehend the language. The person can be able to talk anything fluently but without irrelevantly, that non-sensational speech will be there. That is the condition called as vernix aphasia. And next we move on into the memory formation and retrieval. So as we discussed in last slide, the medial temporal lobe is a secondary thing which has been involved in the temporal lobe. That medial temporal lobe includes with the hippocampal region. It's major forming a crucial formation of retrieving the memory capacity. So which means the hippocampus helps encode of new information, converting the short-term memories into a long-term memory and assist in recalling the previously stored memories. So any damages over in the medial temporal lobe, particularly in the hippocampus region, it may lead to amnesia or inability to form a new formation of memories. A condition is observed in neurodegenerative disorders like Alzheimer's disease. So prosopagnosia, or otherwise called as an face blindness. Damage in temporal don't allow the human to recognize and differentiate between individual faces, including those of family members even with their own reflection. So in case of any damage in the medial temporal lobe, that doesn't allow the human to recognize the facial recognition. If it is in major condition, they couldn't able to analyze their own faces when they are reflecting over via the mirror. They are not able to recognize the family members also. So next is an emotional and social processing. So the temporal lobe also contribute to emotional regulation and social cognition. So which means it's involved within amygdala. It's located deep with the temporal lobe, plays a key role in emotional processing, particularly in responding to fear, threats and emotional memories. For an example, if you take a student, they are going for an examination. Once they start to see that exam, or they start to trigger with then fear, which means the activity of amygdala is very good. So the student may have an fear. So in case of absence of any function in the amygdala, that individual may lag in fear, threats and emotional memories. In case of damage with the amygdala, can repair inability to recognize the emotions. So next, impact of temporal lobe damages. So first thing is an hearing impairment. Damage to the primary auditory cortex can result in hearing difficulties where the individual struggle to make sense of sounds. So next is an memory loss. So damage in the medial temporal lobe, particularly in the hippocampus region, associated with the memory impairment. That means an amnesia. There may be two different types of amnesia will be there. One is an anti-retrograde amnesia and another one is an retrograde amnesia. So which means anti-retrograde amnesia is a futuristic thing. That means a recent memories can't be able to recognize with the individual. Anti-retrograde amnesia, that means a past memory. They lost the memory with the past childhood memories as they done in the small age groups. So next we move on into the parietal lobe. So parietal lobe, it's located near with the upper middle part of the brain, plays a vital role in integrating sensory information and enabling various cognitive functions, which involves in processing of touch, temperature, pain and spatial awareness. So we move on into the structure of parietal lobe. So parietal lobe is positioned between the frontal lobe and the occipital lobe. You can visualize in this image where it was located, the exact parietal lobe, with in between the central sulcus marking the boundaries between it in front of the frontal lobe. So parietal lobe is divided into anterior part as well as the posterior part. So the first thing is a primary somatosensory cortex. It's the major most part in the parietal lobe. It's located in the anterior part along with the post-central gyrus. You can differentiate with the central gyrus which I have given the image over here. It's responsible for processing the tactile information of a body. So next we move on into the function of the parietal lobe. So the primary somatosensory cortex receives an information from receptors like skin, muscle, joints, enabling the humans to perceive sensations such as pressure, temperature and pain, and also it will involve in the sensory perception, spatial awareness, mathematics and language skill attention and perception, coordination of movements also includes. So impacts of parietal lobe damage. So what are the damages can be affect with the parietal lobe and how it will be inflict. So one is an contralateral neglect, otherwise it's called as an spatial neglect. One of the most well-known consequences of parietal lobe damage is contralateral neglect, often referred to as a spatial or hemispatial neglect. How this impact will falls on the patient, it seems the person or an individual affected with the parietal lobe damage, they couldn't able to see the image completely. You can visualize in this picture, the complete model is given as a complete home. The patient copy will, they can able to see only half of the image given in that picture. So next is an agnosia. So most commonly in parietal lobe, the agnosia called as an tactile agnosia, which impair the ability to identify the object through touch. Once the patient closing their eyes and touching with the object, they couldn't able to recognize what is the object is was because it's involved in the somatosensory activity. So the patient couldn't able to identify what are the objects they are holding in the hands as well as by touching any other things. So next is a dyscalculia, a difficulty in understanding and performing the mathematical task. Next is an Jessam's syndrome. It is a rare neurological condition characterized by three primary symptoms. One is an agraphia. Agraphia in the sense difficulty in writing. You can see the image here. The patient couldn't able to write very properly as like the normal patients. So next is an acalculia, difficulty in mathematics, and next is an inability to distinguish right and left and inability to recognize the own finger. That means a finger agnosia. You can see in this picture the patient couldn't able to recognize which is the right hand and which is the left hand, which finger we are touching and which the place we are touching. They couldn't able to perceive the thing where we are touching and which area we are touching because the lack of somatosensory signal passing through via the parietal lobe. And next we move on into the occipital lobe. The occipital lobe located at the back of the brain, you can see in this image, and it's the smallest among all the four major lobes of the cerebral cortex. So we move on into the structure of the occipital lobe. It's the location allowed to be closely connected with the optic nerve. You can see the image here, occipital lobe, and next to this visual lobe and the visual nerve, which carry the informations from eyes. The key structure with the occipital lobe is an primary visual cortex and striate cortex. So this area is responsible for initial processing of visual stimuli and relaying the information to other areas of the brain. The secondary visual area that further refine and integrate the visual information, allowing for perception of color formation and motion, how what is doing around the environment. So we move on into the function of the occipital lobe. The primary function of the occipital lobe is to process the visual information received via eyes. The eyes capture the light and convert it into an electrical signal which had been sent through brain through via the optic nerves that has been involved in color, motion detection, visual memory and recognition of the things. So impact of occipital lobe damages. First and foremost is cortical damage, a severe damage in the primary visual cortex, a condition in which the eyes may be physically intact but the brain is unable to process the visual information due to damage in the cortex area of the primary visual part. Next is an visual field defect. Damage to one hemisphere of the occipital lobe can cause loss of vision in opposite visual field. A condition is called as an hemianopia. The visual field defects are varieties in types. So which may be an damage where the specific part get damaged. According to that criteria, there may be a visual field defect differs from according to the damaged area. So next is in visual agnosia. The occipital lobe damaged but other visual processing area remain intact. An individual may develop with visual agnosia. In this condition in which they are unable to recognize or identify the object despite of having normal vision, you could have seen in this image the patient couldn't able to identify how many objects are inside in that. They couldn't able to predict what are the things, they couldn't able to separate the images as we given here. Next is an color blindness, otherwise called as an achromatopsia, in which the individual lost the ability to perceive the color. That means the world of grey shades. The individual with this condition see the world only in the grey color. They couldn't able to see like in color formation. So next, hallucination and visual disturbances. The occipital lobe damage can also lead with a visual hallucination and other visual disturbances. The individual can hallucinate themselves, someone is surrounding themselves. So that is called as an hallucination of visual disturbances. So next we move on into the final part of the lobe classification, the insula. The insula often referred as an hidden lobe. Why it is called as an hidden lobe? The four lobes will be probably visual to a naked eye once we seen in the anatomical structure, but that insula is be inside very hidden part of the lobe. So of the brain, it's a deeply embedded region of the cerebral cortex that lies beneath the outer lobe. You could have seen in this image the insula, that greenish part area is considered as an insula. It will be considered as an hidden part of the lobe. The insula play a critical role in wide range of function, which includes emotional processing, bodily awareness, pain perception, and even in the social cognition in between the environmental or else the society. So I came to an end of the session. So we will go more into the summarizing part. So we discuss about the brain, introduction of the brain and covering layers of the brain and classification of the brain, that is an frontal, temporal, parietal, occipital, and also is a hidden lobe considered as an insula, and we discussed separately structures and function and impact of damage to lobes. So these are my references. Thank you.